Thank you for tuning in. I'm your host, Justin White, sitting down today with Justin and Ryan from GPI Kuntz. We were on our way back from PRI 2024 and spoke to Ryan about 2 weeks ago, maybe?
Yeah, something like that.
And we put up a post to kind of get some questions that your customer base, your fan base had. Mm-hmm. So we have, I think, 5 or 6 of those questions that towards the end of the episode, if we haven't covered them, we'll go ahead and go over those. Yeah. But basically, we're here today to do some learning, learn where you started, how you got in this industry, how you became what you are, a lot of the records and crazy things you guys have achieved, and maybe get some insight to the technology and things that you guys are messing with, as well as the future.
This is concerning because I thought I was here to learn today.
No, you'll learn about some, wasteful money on cameras.
Okay.
And we'll learn how you guys make things go really fast.
I got you. Okay.
Microphone placement.
Okay.
Microphone placement. Yeah. Well, we are learning that one.
Yeah.
So basically, I guess where does it start? Because as we were driving in here, I noticed there's Gwatney all over this whole city. Yeah. So, and Gwatney Performance, right? So is that, obviously that's all related or?
Yeah. We'll try to do the thumbnail or the little quick version. So essentially, Gwatney Performance started out back in the 90s with Aaron Salisbury, who's our owner, and John Sims, our chief engine builder. And back in the 90s, they were doing the LT stuff, and they were going to Texas to these Vet versus Viper shootouts, and they had stuff running in the 10s and approaching 9-second quarter-mile stuff on drag radials back then with like Gen 1 LT.
I was going to say with the old LT.
Yeah, old LT. Yeah.
They were really impressive for what they were back then. And, EFI getting into the early stages of tuning and everything. The company name back then was Absolute Performance, and they worked that basically out of the corner of the Gwatney Chevrolet dealership. Fast forward, 2010 range, when the 5th Gen Camaros came out, Aaron saw an opportunity to build almost like some cool cars, Yinko style kind of setups that you could just buy and drive, right? So he started using some masked motorsports crate engines and with Maggie blowers on them, and they were just basically doing cookie cutter, drop them in, fuel system, tune them, 750 flywheel horsepower setups, and they were selling those cars as like GPI 750 cars. So that's kind of how GPI got fired off, and I guess the second coming of Absolute Performance, and that was under the wing of Aaron Salisbury. He's kind of the daddy of the whole thing. How I got involved with the company is one of the cars threw a blower belt off, and the company, right in front of the company's parking lot where I worked, which was right up the road at a power sports and marine place, and I was the service manager there, and he needed to borrow some tools to put the belt back on. So I came out, and he was like, "Yeah, I've heard your name. Like, you do some tuning and stuff, don't you?" I said, "Yeah, just all my buddy stuff and hobby stuff. Air Force Base is here, and people that found me on LS1 Tech. Yeah, a little bit." He's like, "You can talk to me sometime." So we flirted back and forth with, coming down there for probably a year and a half or so, and then when separated from this place up here, I was like, "Hey, man, I could use that job, bro."
Yeah.
That's kind of how in my job interview essentially was, "Okay, yeah, come down. I've got a car on the dyno, and I want you to tune this car, and we'll just go from there." In my mind, I'm thinking, I'm a country boy from eastern Arkansas. Very humble, rural beginnings. Definitely don't come for money. Had never been on a chassis dyno. I'm like, I'm going to make my way through. I'm going to figure it out. So I did. And essentially, he hired me and came in, and that's where everything started for me with the company. And fast forward to 12, 13 years later, we've grown to something a little bit more than just doing a little tuning and stuff. So my vision was always kind of wanting to grow into, I'm not going to say exactly like Lingenfelter, but like I wanted to get to where we were doing our own cams, our own heads, our own little bit of fab work, our own tuning. When GPI touched it, I wanted it to be GPI.
Right, start to finish.
Nothing against any other competitor or any other brand. I just wanted to be the daddy of that project, to know when it goes out and does something, well, that's you. That's all you. And that's really was always my dream. And I wanted to, talking with Aaron, over time I was like, I wanted, like e-commerce, we can touch a lot of people. We can help a lot of people with some of our products and knowledge. And slowly over time, that's what we did, and we grew a little bit at a time and added staff a little bit at a time until we're here. And Justin, you came on probably 3-4 years ago.
Yeah, January 21.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
you know, that growth that they're experiencing, you know, and they wanted their own machine work and their own cams and all that. And, you know, Aaron and the guys here at GPI were kind of relying on a whole slew of machine shops in Arkansas. Well, I mean, first off, it's hectic enough under one roof, you know, like let alone coordinating with multiple machine shops and stuff. And, you know, there's an opportunity for Aaron to kind of effectively purchase Kuntz & Company. So that's what happened, and then that way you control the machine work all in one business, you know, and that was 2019. And you know, part of that was also with Jim Kuntz. You know, he was doing a lot of the cylinder head R&D, you know, for GPI, and so it was an easy transition.
Yeah.
You know, really. I mean, Aaron and Jim have been friends from years back. I mean, Jim's a long-standing name in performance in Arkansas. I mean,
it was seamless, you know.
yeah.
Funny story on how I met Jim, and we kind of got acquainted with Jim or fixed up on a business level. Was Jim had done an LS swap on a pickup, like a 90 model. We called it a Twix truck. It was like red and brown, like two-tone. It looked like a Twix bar or a wrapper.
Yeah.
So he had done an LS swap and came into us for some calibration work. And I'm like riding down the road with him, and I'm tuning on this thing, and he's like, you know, I like what you guys do, you know. I think I want to, you know, I'm going to talk to Aaron a little bit. And they developed a friendship. And, man, in like a month's time, it seemed like Jim was working part-time with us. I'm like, I got like this legend over here working, like doing this stuff. Like, this is surreal. You know, like we picked up so much knowledge from Jim, you know, from his days of racing and high-level racing, class racing, you know, at the highest levels. And learning how to work those areas and the intangibles and all the things that don't get talked about. Learning how to really learn how to optimize a combo. And, you know, Jim started doing all of our head development like Justin mentioned. And it was just started clicking. And there was that moment for opportunity for us to purchase Kuntz & Company. And Aaron pulled the trigger on that and made that happen. And at that point, everything was going great. Yeah. Then Mr. Kuntz, shortly thereafter,
May of 19, yeah.
May of 19, he passed away, unfortunately. You know, we carried on, you know, hopefully we're carrying on his legacy. We're doing our best job, I think,
right.
You know, to do what we can. It's hard. You can't replace a guy like that.
No.
All you can try to do is, you know, put your best version forward. So that's what we try to do on a daily basis. And you know, I think some of the cylinder heads probably, some have been revised, but some are probably some of the stuff he still developed.
Yeah,
you know,
I mean, yeah,
5-6 years ago. So it's been.
Well, we've got like the vague picture, but so what got you into wanting to tune cars to begin with? Like, where did that start?
Well, when I was younger, a teenager, I had a part-time job at an auto parts store in eastern Arkansas. I'm from Marianna, a very small town that nobody that's going to watch this has ever heard of, probably.
They're going to Google it now, though.
Yeah,
They're
going to Google it now.
You're not going to miss anything. So it's a very rural area and a lot of farmland. Matter of fact, that's what my dad still does. He works on a farm, so it's ag, just flat. It's flat out there. There's nothing to do besides mess with cars and work on a farm or some kind of industry like that. And I was working at this parts store, and we did like entry-level machine, like cylinder head, valve guides, and seats, and a little bit of head milling, and like some honing and cylinder boring, like just scratching the surface.
Right.
Like for ag equipment mainly. Hydraulic hoses, brake stuff. Well, some of the guys I worked with were into racing and things like that. Chuck Moore, to name one. And Chuck was 7 or 8 years older than me. And he was in his 20s at the time. I just kind of looked up to him, and, you know, his group of friends raced, and like I was hanging out with these guys that were 6, 7, 8 years older than me, and was going out, and I was just a sponge. So we were small block Chevy back then. This was in the 90s. So
oh, geez.
I'm just trying to take in everything that I can. And I had a little 66 model Chevrolet truck, and I wanted to race if it moved, like if
it blinked, we were going.
you didn't have to blink. Like it was just, I looked over at you and it was just, I'm gonna go. And I had some other buddies in town, and we did a lot of racing. And needless to say, I got my butt kicked a lot to start with. So that kind of, I don't like losing. I don't like losing. So I had a nice little small block in the truck. This was when I found out that weight was so important. Like this truck I had gotten used had like this big bed cover on it that was made out of like vinyl and wood and everything. Like I wrestled it off the truck. I weighed like $120 back then. I wrestled it off the truck, and then I went and raced some of these same guys I raced before. I kicked their ass, man. I was like, yeah. And I'm like knocking on their door at like 11 o'clock at night. Hey, man, come out. I made some changes. I got you. Come on. You can't hide forever. You know, I'm like 120 pounds. I'm talking smack to these guys. I'm 16 years old. And that's how I got into it. So that's how I got into, you know, the motorsports and racing. Now, how I got into the tuning side of things was very simple. When I moved up here and started working at the power sports place, a buddy of mine had a 2002 pickup. And we built a little 408 6.0 naturally aspirated setup for it. And we were going out and street racing a lot. And he had a mail order tune. And you probably remember this guy, Jesse Bubb at Wait For Me Performance.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So he had tuned it, and you know, it actually ran and drove pretty good. It started right up and it was fine. But we thought, man, we're gonna get this thing dyno tuned. So we went to a dyno shop over here. Nobody that anybody's heard of or that's still really doing anything that I know of. And we just had a bad experience. You know, the truck lost a little power, and it just was worse off when we left than it was when we showed up. And yeah, it kind of bothered me. You know, I was kind of behind the engine program a little bit. So I was like, well, I know what the engine wants. And, you know, I knew how to, you know, mess with stuff and kind of tune stuff, so to speak, with carburetor or distributor. But I'd never done any computer programming. So another friend of mine was putting his truck back stock, and he had an EFI live cable. And I had helped him with it. And he had Black Bear tuning his truck. And he said,
so this is definitely the 90s, 2000s,
this
right
was
there.
early 2000s.
Early 2000s,
This was like early mid 2000s, somewhere around there. So he said, I want to put my truck back stock and sell it. I'm like, cool. Well, I won't charge you if I can get that EFI live cable. He's like, cool, man. Sounds good. So that was my first tuning cable. And it just kind of went from there for me. I was so terrified that, you know how it was when you started. So I rode to work with this guy every day. So I messed with this thing. I had to have like 3,000 revisions on this truck.
Yep.
Like, I would never touch anybody else's stuff until I knew it was like completely right. And the truck ended up running pretty good. It kind of went from there. You know, I was on LS1 Tech and performancetrucks.net forum. And, you know, I read a lot more than I posted because I was still trying to learn a lot.
Right.
Know? And looking back, man, I've learned a lot since those days. But, you know, that's how I kind of got into it. And, you know, from there, it was just kind of word of mouth. I didn't do any advertising. I was charging like $175 to tune somebody. It paid for the credits, and I made like $50 or $75, you know, at the time.
It's more kind of bred out of necessity. I mean, same thing. I had a shop, and I had a guy that I had tuned 3 cars, and he blew all 3 up. And I was like, shit, I could have did that. Yeah. And I started actually with a 2000 model truck. Yeah. And started dealing with that. Luckily, I got hooked up with a guy that kind of mentored me along the way. But it's funny how, that's why I asked where the beginnings come from, because it's kind of like that. It's like, I can't really afford to pay somebody to tune my stuff. Yeah. So we might as well learn it. And then once you have that mind state where you just always want to listen and learn. Yeah, for sure. You know, because just think about it now. You know, if you look back to what you were doing 5 years ago, you may have been top of the game then. But if you look at it now, you're like, damn, I was stupid 5 years ago.
Yeah, I look at some of the tunes that I did 5 or 6 years ago, and you're like,
and they worked, right? But there was.
Here, let me make these changes.
Yeah, let me clean that back up now.
Who did that?
And it's not even giving the customer a problem, but it's stuff that as a tuner that we're particular and we see it.
Right.
And it's not that they notice or feel anything. It's just like, yeah, let me go ahead and dress this up. You know, knowledge, we constantly evolve, right? So, but I'm very much a DIY guy, so there was no question I'm going to get in here and try to learn how to do it. Always worked on my own stuff and did as much as I possibly could. So that's where it started for me.
It seems like a lot of the guys that have the the diagnostic mechanical background. So my background was working for GM, Diag Tech, you know, doing the heavy line stuff. So, you know, your background, I guess, working on things,
hands-on,
kind of being able, I guess the way I relate it is you're able to picture like what's actually happening in the motor, where I feel like the guys that kind of struggle don't have that background. But to see the airflow knowledge that you guys have now, you know, wrapping that up with the tuning, that's got to be a pretty significant advantage.
We certainly feel like it is. I mean, we realize there is some serious competition. You know, there's tons of great shops that do exactly what we do. Some parts of what we do, I think we're a little bit unique in how diverse we are with all of the things we do, from machining to doing shop builds to a large e-commerce operation to calibration work. We do a lot of things, but I completely agree with you. I think the best calibration guys are always the guys that have the best mechanical understanding of engines and airflow, because you have to understand. You can be the smartest computer guy in the world, but if you don't understand what the engine wants or why it wants it, then no amount of pedigree of programming is going to get you to the finish line first if you don't know the mechanical side of things.
Well, you know, the way I like to cut it short, you know, is a tune can't fix, you know, nothing bad mechanical, you know, and you got to know like what happens. Just, you know, you want to turn more RPM, but if you don't have a valve trainer under control to turn more RPM, and you don't understand the relationship between, you know, valve weight and valve spring pressures, and, you know, I mean,
compression ratios.
Yes.
And, you know, the timing advanced needs for compression ratios and combos. You know, there's so much that goes into being a tuner.
Knowing what the combo is going to want, knowing where that line is, knowing, especially with like the remote tuning stuff.
Right.
You know, you can bring somebody like here, but knowing not to put them here is where.
Here is live forever. Here is about a half a tenth faster and on the edge of
disaster.
You know, absolute disaster.
Right.
And, you know, we all try to push and evolve. You know, that's part of innovation, and occasionally we all tear some stuff up, and that's part of the learning process. But, you know, just learning over time the difference in you know, the research and when you can and can't do that versus being absolutely negligent and just swinging for the fences all the time.
Right,
That's
right.
a huge difference.
Well, and I think that comes out a lot when you kind of start, right?
Yes.
So when you start, you kind of go out there, and I feel like we've all done it. You start and you go out there and you start kicking ass, so you get real big headed.
Yeah.
And then as you kind of go through this, you kind of learn, and you're like, maybe I should just chill out a little bit. Let me try a little harder, and then you just get to a point where you're like, I know what this car can do. This is where it needs to be. You know, and they're like, oh, well, somebody can do this. Let them do that.
Yeah.
Then, you know, that's
No one has more pride or a larger ego than a tuner.
right. We're drama queens.
I mean, it's just we just go out there and we push. Like we don't like to lose. We're going to push any means necessary. You know, that's how we start. But then as we mature and learn things over time, obviously, we dial it back and we learn how to get that 99% and then stay safe rather than, you know.
Or we get tired of blowing our own shit up, and we're like, okay, this is where my car lived for a little while. I can put the customers a little bit raised right there.
Yeah, that thing right there is like, I'm like 20 combos deep into learning. You know, it's basically I've built the whole business, you know, for Fitchy and stuff off of my own dime.
Yeah, my truck got 4 motors.
Yeah.
But I guess the other thing, kind of going back to having the mechanical knowledge with the tuning, I think that's where you get a lot of stuff where people are like, oh, you can't do a remote tune. You don't want to trust a remote tune. While I can agree a dyno can get certain things, in my opinion, having it dialed in the way it's going to be driven, I feel is significantly better. Yes, your local guy may be able to do it, but I feel like somebody that specializes in the platform, right?
Yeah.
And understands every bit of that data that you're seeing should get you a significant advantage if that's not local to you. But you guys have the advantage of having it local to you and remote.
Yeah. I used to be that guy that always thought that own hands was going to be better, right? And I think it gives you the best chance to be better if you have the right qualified person punching the keys on the computer.
I was going to say, I think it also, you have to know that the customer is going to have their stuff in order too.
Right. That's absolutely true. Now, over time, I've learned that you can do some very amazing things remotely with the right people, with the right customers, the right kind of data. And I guess some of that starts with the customer, some starts with us, because we have to give clear instruction of what we need, and they have to be very dialed in and diligent with not being reckless in getting this stuff right, because we have to creep up on these tune-ups a lot of times, especially on power adder stuff, right? We can't just go out and just swing for the fence and just home run right off the bat.
Well, and I'm sure you've had it because I've had a pretty wild experience, but where you send them their base file and they go make a pull.
Yeah, to about 170.
Yeah. Well, I had one for, I think it was 18 minutes down the Autobahn, wide open in a V2 on a base file.
Yeah.
Thank God I've done over 1,000 of those, and somehow it lived.
Yeah.
But yeah, that, and you got to think, you got to account.
That's just nuts.
Well, you got to think when you tune remote, right? I'm sure you tune in other countries. We tune in several other countries, so you got to kind of learn their fuel too.
Yeah, like what is 98 octane pump gas? Like I've never tuned something with 98 octane pump gas here in person, but I do them overseas.
But in some countries, that 98 is relative to our 91.
Yeah,
Exactly.
That's where people get that's
exactly.
and that's been a learning thing for me. And I guess the way I approached it was using a knock monitor and actually going through different fuels and building my spark tables, which I'm sure the R&D you've done similar.
I think I've still got a Plex knock monitor back there.
And you got to sit there and creep on it and kind of learn, because when you're doing it over there, also the humidity or the temperature or the elevation.
Material, iron to, you had a car that came with aluminum block and now it's got an iron block in it.
Right.
All those knock thresholds are different.
Way off.
Yeah.
But it's kind of scary doing the remote stuff. But once you get a feel for it, I mean, do you agree that having, so if it's an NA setup, like that's your thing, right? So, them bringing it to their local guy, he can probably get it, 85, 90% there. But if he's not, that's not his thing, right? Even remote, you can see enough that you can get it 98, 99%.
Yeah, fortunately, with as popular as late model racing is, there's generally not too many people that don't have the ability to go out and either make some pulls with the draggy and, use that as baseline data and kind of look for improvements there, or going to the track, and what other data is any better than actually going to the track? I can have the best looking dyno sheet in the world, but if it won't fall out of the tree when it gets to the racetrack, it's not any good.
I mean, how many times have you had a car that makes significantly more power than the car that you tuned and it loses?
Right.
We see that all the time.
How many times have you had a car on the dyno where you optimize it on the dyno, and because of the load is different on the dyno, you get on the street and now you've got to pull a couple of degrees of timing out and fatten it up a half a point.
Which is what I always try to tell people. I'm like, they're like, oh, I really want it done on the dyno. I'm like, okay, but you've got to take it down the street. Well, I really don't want to make a pull down the street. I'm like, then why did we tune the car? What did we build here?
Yeah.
Well, I don't really take it to the track, and every now and then I'll rip it on the street. I'm like, then you have to rip it on the street. We've got to see that.
Drag race on the dyno.
I mean, even if you get the load super close on the dyno, it's always different because there's different airflow coming through. There's different aerodynamics against the car. People don't realize that.
The load is different. It's just it's always a moving target. You can't.
And it's always about half an AFR to it too.
Yeah,
which is kind of funny.
Yeah, it needs fuel added and it needs timing taken out, especially on a power adder car. Especially NA stuff is pretty close, but a power adder setup, and a PD car, going to pick up a little boost a little bit almost in every gear. As soon as it lugs back down, it's got a little more
torque too.
You don't see that on the dyno unless you've got a hub dyno and you can run through.
Got a little hub dyno.
But I don't yet. Eventually, one of these days when we grow up.
Yeah.
When we grow up.
Big boys one day will have.
Well, I mean, you guys, one chassis dyno. I mean, we got 2 engine dynos.
They do have 2 engine dynos.
Yeah.
They're bragging now, but only one of them works right now.
But he has.
Yeah, okay, I'll give you that one. Yeah.
So what, I guess once you guys kind of decided you were going to do GPI, right, kind of bring it all under one roof, when did all the record stuff kind of start? Like what kind of got you fired up to do that? Because I think you'd said a 4L60 record for quite a bit, which...
There's a story behind each one of these builds, but, for me it started when I got my 5th gen. I wasn't even working for GPI at that point. I had it before it worked. Everybody thinks it's a shop car. It's never.
That's what I thought it was.
No, it's never been a shop car. It's my car. It's always been funded with my money, unless I bought some parts at cost, or Aaron was feeling sad for me one day and gave me a ring gear and pinion or something, whatever. But I've had some sponsor help along the way. Circle D's always been helpful with me because I worked with them on providing them data and prototype stuff, and they provide me product to use and test. They've been some in Cam Motion, but for me, I got that car, and then forums were still a thing, right? So like I was on Camaro 5, and I'm like, fast list, let's go over here, bolt on. So I'm like, okay, cool. And then Cam, I started going through there. I'm like, so the fastest one of these is like 1087, huh, or 1089. I'm like, okay, so there's my target. So
He's like cake.
I went there. I put I started out. I did a cam setup, cam only setup, legit cam only, not today's cam only terms, but in a yank converter, and the thing just went 60 foot, man. So Circle D, Chris hit me up, was like, hey, I got this converter. We're gonna try this thing, and I'm like, okay, cool. Went out and picked up like 3/10. So like I went out and went faster with cam only than the fastest cam head car at the time. And at that point I was like 1070s. I had gotten into the 1080s the first time out, then I went 1070s, then I went 1040s, then I went 1030s with different cam head combos, and then I was like, my car actually got stolen out of our shop and they trashed the engine. I mean, they just ragged it. So like we found it the next day, but I had to fix it. So it built an engine and put in the car like it was weird as an oddball, like a 388 cubic inch LS7 titanium rod. It was like a hodgepodge of things just kind of going together. It didn't last. It had some the rods, the LS7 rod issue.
They rub or
it
something?
made some metal. Yeah, so it didn't last. So I put together like a 416 street engine, like 12-to-1, pump gas friendly, driving everywhere, 6L80 still in the car. And dang, Rick Crawford went out and went 990s with his car, and I had been 10-0s. I'm like, there's no way I'm letting a 4-door car.
That was with his G8, right?
With his G8,
yeah.
Right. So I'm like, I can't. It's unacceptable. So I went to Memphis, and I went 996. And I was like, man, me and Rick, I can't remember what his ET was, but we were basically right there together. But I didn't have like mega great air, so I went down to State Capitol in Baton Rouge and ended up going 970s with the car. And all was fine and well in my life until a guy started talking smack to me before Camaro Fest. So like the whole stop bottom end, really pushing that stop bottom end stuff.
That's when that started getting real hot,
That's when it started. So like, it's cool, man. I got something for you.
Are we going to mention who it was?
Car. Huh?
Who was that?
It's a customer who was a former customer that got an attractive offer from TSP to run their cam and heads, sponsorship type deal, and I'm just gonna say he's a customer.
That's
again.
fine.
He's a customer again. Mike Nelway is his name. Love you, Mike. I was motivated, man. He fired me up, bro. It just lit a fire again.
Well, sometimes that's good. That's what breeds more innovation.
Like, he had a Turbo 400 in his car. I said, man, I'm going to come to the track. I'm going to sit just like him. We're going to be ready. So I pulled the motor out of the car, sold it to a customer and a friend locally, pulled the trans out, sold it, put a Turbo 400 in the car, put the motor in, and went out. And the very first time out, I went 990s, then went to Camaro Fest, and TSP showed up with a freaking $100,000 top bottom end car, man. Like, I was like,
I'm pretty sure I've seen this car.
I was like, what do I do with this? And they go out, and that weekend I broke my differential. Mr. Jim Coons actually brought me a Eaton True Track to the track. We fixed it the next morning. Then I qualified number one and had top mile per hour. I went 992 or something like that, and they had gone like 994 or something like that. Or maybe I went 980s, but I was a little faster than they were that weekend. Well, that year they came back out, or I went 970s, then I went a 960 something or 960. Then they come out and they went a 937 when the air got cool.
Jesus. Way to drop that hammer.
I just had my head down. I was just like, all right, I got some more in the car. I went out in my driveway at home. I'm peeling parts of the wire harness out of it that aren't even used anymore.
I don't need both headlights.
Yeah, I was like, I started taking stuff out of the car, trimming back double layer metal. Got some weight out of the car, and I went back out and I went 927 right off the trailer. I clipped them right off the rip, and I think I ended up going to 925 that day. It was like a racket car back to back to back, and that lasted. And I was a king again.
That was all from weight.
Yeah, and air. The air came
right. Okay,
around.
Okay.
The air came around. I had been running summertime, so like 2,500 DA to like negative 800.
Now, is the air better for NA or better for blower?
I think
better for boost?
I think
Just curious.
everything. I think everything.
Air is air.
So they kind of benefit.
Yeah.
They both benefit.
Yeah,
But some people say, NA benefits more from better air than boost. And I'm like, I don't know. I mean,
I
the
think both.
same dense
Everything
air.
picks up a lot with air.
Okay. Not to get off on a tangent. I was just curious your opinion.
So, at this point, I had been basically the cam head Fitchian NA king
Daddy, right?
essentially from like 2012 or 13 to like 2018, 6 or 7 years. And then TSP had that car come out. We went back and forth. And then I took it back right at the end of the year. I swear it was January of the very next year. 2 months later, they came out and they went 896 or 897.
Yeah, I remember seeing that one.
They were the first one to the 8s. I'm like, dang it. So at that point, they just had more car than me. I knew I made more power, but they had more car. They were lighter, strut front end. They was just, the car was so efficient. I said, at that point, I looked over at my wife, Joni. I said, I don't care if it takes me 3 years and every dime I can save to do it. I'm going to outrun that car if it's the last thing I do. So that last round of stop, bottom, end stuff, that's exactly what I did. And it took me about, it was 2021 when I did that. It took me about a little over 2 years, I think. But I buried at 855 at 154.
Jesus.
And that was the last I ever heard about any of that. So
at that point, it's like
nobody else has really tried at this point. Somebody could come out and go faster.
Oh,
it's doable. I mean, that
not with these though,
because with what I know with some of the fuels and stuff now, I was on Q16 race gas. I wasn't even on an ethanol or anything. So there's more there. I mean, I could
no nitro, no nothing.
No, that was and that was like I engine dynoed it. It made 829. But long story short, to talk about records, it started with me with my own car, but along the way, some other journeys, like you said, 4L60 record, which recently got broken. But I just had a customer with C6 Z06 that the build started out. I just want to spray a little nitrous and this and that, and then it turned into, I want to outrun this guy. I'm like, cool, man. So we ended up going like 840s at 166.
With a 4L60.
With 4L60. I mean, we were having to put like 3-4 clutches in it every 3 or 4 passes.
Right.
But
I remember my 4L60 days, I was like, I had a 100 shot and a 200 shot. And if I sprayed the 100, I was good. But if I sprayed the 200, it had to be worth it because I was rebuilding the trans after.
Yeah. That's kind of how it was for us. And about that same time frame, customer had a ZR1 that we had done a power glide swap on. We were starting to do a lot of grudge racing with. So back then we didn't post times really. Well, we did, but we had published the 830s time slip, but we had gone faster than that and we were doing a fair amount of grudge racing, traveling around a little bit. And ultimately we had ended up going like 5 teens with that car back in like 16 or 17 or something.
That's flying.
It was a stop bottom end LS9 with a ported factory blower and a bunch of nitrous in it.
Yeah.
And it was kind of the king for that realm of things it was. And then I just had, customers kind of saw that we were dedicated to being able to achieve or have goals and reach goals. So then we kind of had people that wanted to chase some things kind of come on board, and that's kind of how that worked. I think you attract what you do, so.
Right. Well, everybody kind of sees what you do and they want to be part of it.
Yeah.
Right.
So 6-gen stuff was no different. We had some customers that were in 5th-gen world with us, and then they, like Brandon Hill, that got a 6-gen car, and there he went to chasing, and that's kind of how that worked.
With something I want to talk about on the Power Glide, I did a podcast with Jay Meager. I'm not sure if you know RS Garage. He was part of Real Street before.
Yeah, Real Street, yeah.
So I always thought, Power Glide was pretty awesome, right? I had one in my RX-7, but he was like, if you think about the Power Glide, it's kind of dumb because you get out there in the meat, right in that peak torque, and it just fights through that peak torque. And then you throw it in high gear and it has to fight through it again. So what's the thought between that? And do you think maybe a Turbo 400 with that extra little bit of keeping it in the peak power range would have done?
Yeah, I saw that.
Because I needed your opinion because I know you, not only do you deal with those transmissions, but you do deal with the modern overdrive stuff a lot as well, and you're efficient in both. So what's the reasoning for going? All right. So basically, I was asking about, you deal with a lot of the overdrive stuff, the modern overdrive. You deal with a lot of the Turbo 400, Turbo 350, Turbo, Power Glide. With what Jay had said, what are your kind of thoughts on that? Especially because you come from a very extensive power band knowledge, right? What he said related to me, because I definitely would burn motors every now and then, spray in the car when it would lug if I'd shift second too early.
Yeah.
Do you think that there's gain there, that maybe I was being cheap and should have went to a 350? Because I've noticed you did a 350 on another car.
No, I mean, the 16 car, we did a 350 on. I think, truth be told, with the converter technology out today, I think it'd be faster with the 890, to be honest with you, because we lost lockup efficiency out the back. So we're not going to be able to mile per hour what we could with the 8L90. Now, in regards to what he's saying with the Power Glide, just kind of laying on the converter and lugging the engine, I kind of disagree. The Power Glides in 400s, you're going to have that with a 400 as well, even though it's a 3-speed, right? You're going to go out, 1-2, it's going to lay on the converter, and then couple, climb, and especially the 2-3, it's going to lay on the converters for a car that's geared for quarter-mile stuff. That comes down to really the power plant and the converter, right? So lugging, laying on the converter at 6,000 on the shift drop, from 7,000, let's say you shifted 7 and it fell back to 6. Laying on the converter at 6,000 there, or even if you want to say shifted at 6,500 and it fell back to 5,000, right? 5,000 is about an RPM you would see on a lock converter, like a 6-speed or 8-speed car, right? So lock converter 5,000 RPM is loaded a lot more than 5,000 RPM on an unlocked converter.
Okay. And I wonder if maybe what he was talking about was the 2JZ platforms and things like that. Maybe they're a little more specific in the higher RPM where we have a lot more torque.
Yeah, maybe relative to the power plants he's working with, but a lot of the engines we work with have, 1,500 RPM wide areas that are just plentiful in power and like they motor through that.
Right.
So the loose converters actually help make the car work down low. It's a little spongy, so it hits the tire a little softer on the hit. Then it kind of lays there right in that power curve, and then right where the converter starts to get efficient and coupling up, that's where the car starts pulling. That's where the magic happens, and then it couples and pulls up. But you need a good converter for that. If you have a converter that's very inefficient, it can very much make a lot of noise and not go anywhere.
Well, you probably, I guess, what he was relating to was obviously a little older technology at that point when he was really messing with it. Because you could probably get a little tighter converter and run like a dump valve or something, right?
Yeah, you could do that. You don't get a ton of benefit in our personal experience with a dump on like a Glide. I don't think that it's as efficient as having like dual dumps on a 2-speed 400 or something like that. But don't get me wrong, a lot of setups would probably benefit with a 3-speed, especially naturally aspirated setups. Even heavy power adder setups are probably going to like a 3-speed, especially if you have a little tighter ratio 3-speed. But
I guess that's because I guess what really got me kind of thinking about it was like, yeah, I get what he's saying and it makes sense. But I guess with the different power plant, why would they make a 2-speed 400?
Yeah, exactly. If it wasn't any good.
Right. And
why are the fastest guys in the world running, or some of the fastest guys in the world running 2 and 3-speed?
Right. I tested, the whole converter lockup thing in the 6-speed. I'm like, man, let's just run this thing unlocked. And I was talking to Justin Shear, and he's like, do they stip any classes for lockup or non-lockup? And I was like, what do you mean? He goes, well, they don't knock you out of the race if you have a non-lockup 400, do they? And I'm like, oh, yeah, that was a waste of time. So I guess the efficiency thing's there.
It is, for sure.
So I just wanted your opinion on that one, because I've seen you dabble in both of them. The Turbo 350 car, now knowing what you know, do you think it would be faster with, say, a modern 10-speed?
Yeah. Well, that car was on C85 fuel. So it was a high RPM, high strung, stock bottom end, smaller cubic inch, type deal, 376 cubic inch. Doesn't make a lot of torque under the curve, but it makes a lot of horsepower up here. That's what drove us to do the 3-speed, because the converter would flash like 7,200, and we shifted the car at like 85, 8,600.
Okay.
you're not going to get a 10-speed or an 8-speed converter that flashes 7,000 anything. So even though we're giving up some efficiency on the back half of mile per hour, it's probably still close.
Because you're catching it so much on the front half.
We're so fast on the front half, right? We're so fast on the front half that we were able to give up a little bit on the back and still.
What kind of 60 foots were you getting out of that thing? Or can you say?
Mid 110s.
Oh yeah, yeah. So it was moving.
I mean, for what's another a true C85 car that's not on nitro or have big cubes at 60 footing like that? You know?
No, I mean, yeah, that's.
So now, if that car runs some fuel mix, you know, and we have fuel, even if we just mix some nitro with C85, or if it had port injection, we could run some nitro and M5. Now the overdrive transmission needs to go back in because the torque loosens the converter up. The more torque you make, the looser that converter acts.
Right.
So now that converter that would only go 5,500 on an 8-speed would easily get up in the mid 6,000s. Right. Yeah. So now that overdrive is going to be beneficial. Even though we're adding a little bit of weight back to the car, we can basically get it out of the hole, shift a second, lock the converter, and never look back. Because that combo with the fuel mix likes to be loaded down and pull through that lockup because it makes so much torque and such power through the curve.
But it kind of brings its own power in, so it doesn't have to rely on that RPM to get it in.
Yeah, it's basically it's like big block in a bottle. You know, it just the little motors start acting like big blocks. They start making so much torque. So
big block in a bottle.
Basically,
I mean that's kind of what it is.
Yeah, I mean, people, you know, act like it's a power adder, and don't get me wrong, I was the last person out of all of us that, or all of the shops that are running nitro that wanted to run it. Right? I always felt like it needed to have an asterisk beside it because it's not really fair. But if the other guys are going to do it, then we will too. That's fine.
You have to.
Well,
I mean, you have to. Otherwise, you get covered up in it.
I was going to say, I remember the first time I went to dabble in it, I called you and I said, "Hey, so I've already had this guy take his motor apart because I thought there was a bolt in it.
Yeah,
what's going on?"
It was just chirping.
Yeah.
And Ryan's like, "No, dude, it's like that." And I'm like, "I'm sorry. Did you say that was normal?" We really tore the front of the motor down.
Yeah,
because I thought a bolt fell out.
Yeah.
But anyways, and you would kind of give me a little advice, and we put it on the track, and it tried to grab the back bumper, and I was like, okay, we're gonna reassess this, and
yeah.
So, how crazy was that learning curve?
You know, I think in my mind I thought it was going to be worse than it was. Yeah. Honestly. Now the car you were messing with, I don't know if it had functional port injection on it or not, or if you were doing it with all DI. It
did. But we had turned it off at some point just to do some testing.
Okay. When I started doing it, I started with a port kit. And I put straight M5 in the car and dialed it in on methanol. And I found out what the happiest air fuel and timing was. Then I compared that with my C85 tune. And I'm like, okay. Then I started at 25% nitro, pretty much. So with stuff.
Send it out there. Most people start around, 12?
Yeah, I mean, 10, 15.
He's like, yeah, double it.
Well, you know, I just was like, I knew we were going to have to run a little bit to do what we wanted to accomplish. So I kind of started there and, you know, I threw a bunch of fuel at it because one thing with nitro is it does not like to run lean. No. So you do not need to run it lean or you will be buying parts frequently. So it wasn't bad, you know. I mean, I think it's just like tuning anything else, but it is not very forgiving. You know, if
it gets unhappy,
it's going to tear some stuff up.
It's unstable.
Yeah, and it requires methanol and nitro requires so much maintenance for the engine, so frequent oil changes, and you know, it just a lot comes with running that fuel. Everybody thinks, man, I want to run. Can I run some nitro?
I'm just gonna pour it in my tank and then go drive around town.
Easy. Like this is a big commitment from you to be able to run this and make that kind of power. Now, that being said, there's some big power with the nitro. I mean,
Well, that's something like you were touching on. A lot of people are like, oh, well, I'm not running nitro. I'm running C85. And I'm like, well, that's got a little bit of something in it, MTBE, which is not the same thing. But then when you actually get into the guys that are mixing nitro and trying to compare it to C85, it's like, It's like that's like having a 50 shot on your car or something,
Yeah.
and depending on how much nitro, 150 shot on your car, and acting like it's not there.
Yeah, I mean,
You know, that's it. Nitro's.
I think my early testing, I own 25%. I think we picked up a little over 100 wheel on 25% versus M5 only. Or excuse me, maybe that was over the C85. I think that was over the C85, but I hadn't really got rough with the tune-up. You know, I was pretty much kind of worked up to that point. It was
You
like,
didn't start adding 10 degrees.
no,
That's how the
definitely not.
Coyote guys do it.
Well, you know,
They put nitro in there. Like, let's add another 10.
nitro does burn slower. So
I hear you.
At some point, there is going to be a spot where you are going to have to start doing that, but it makes so much power without being aggressive with it that it's almost foolish unless you're prepared to go down that road of fixing stuff all the time to even treat it that way. For me,
Right.
I don't need to squeeze that hard to go out and what we want to do on these combos just yet. So I'd rather just handle it with kitty gloves a little bit, and I'm just kind of like babying in there. We still haven't really pushed the nitro stuff real hard.
I was gonna say, because I mean, you mostly compete. Most of your customers and all compete on just regular C, right?
Mostly, yes, yeah, yeah. And
So-
the
And I mean,
C
you're
war-
being competitive at that level.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we were competitive with C with guys that were on nitro for quite a while,
Right.
or nitro mixes,
Spoken or unspoken.
spoken or unspoken. Usually unspoken, but we,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, I didn't spray it. My 60 foot just was lazy.
Yeah,
Like, okay.
yeah. That just sounds like rocks are in the header collectors.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
It's probably not nitro,
Yeah.
but
Loose bolt, man.
I would say the fuel is not bad to dial in. You just need adequate fuel system. You start using so much more fuel volume at that point that it's just ridiculous. So
Yeah. That's I dabbled in the methanol stuff on my car, and I got to the point where I was like, I could watch my fuel needle drop.
Mhm.
And I'm like, for what I try to do, mostly just street stuff, I'm like, dude, I don't think I can make
It's
it
overkill.
a night
Yeah.
out with a tank of fuel. So I was like, I'll deal with that later.
Yeah.
So I usually just run the pump crap we can find. So when it comes to like cylinder head stuff, where did that development kind of start? Because as I was talking to you earlier, I had a customer with a CTSV that had your heads on it, and comparing it. And again, at this point, I probably did 800-900 V2s, so I know what combo makes what power. Like, you do this long enough, you're like, this is going to make this. And that car made like 90 more horsepower than it should have made. And I was like, man, this is really confusing. And I bought another set of heads and was able to do the same thing. Still don't know how that happened. But where did that come in the picture? Was that specifically from Kuntz? Did you guys learn together with the record cars, or did it come out of a necessity deal too?
yeah, I mean, the LS3 based stuff certainly would have been early on. Would have been from Jim Kuntz himself, and then from there, we learned, and I ran them on my stock bottom end setup that went 920s. I still had ported factory heads that Jim had done, on my car. When I went to the 8s, I had the CID heads at that point. But yeah, I mean, Jim did the LS3 based stuff and some of the LS7 stuff then. But, eventually, these guys started doing all the port development and going back through some of those programs to see if we could tweak and change anything and improve on anything.
That is one thing to kind of talk about. I mean, Kuntz & Company's been around since 1981, 1983, 1981, somewhere in there. But for about 90% of that time, it was all NA, NA class racing and stuff like that. And I'd say probably in the mid 2000s is when everything just started going power outer. Cylinder head development for NA is not the same for cylinder head development power adder. It's totally different things. And you guys earlier were talking about the path of destruction is to learning. Well, it's the same thing for us head guys and us block guys. When we see y'all consistently break something, or the plug burn ins here, or the seat does this, or the short side does that, the guide does this. You fix those areas first, and usually those areas are what are kind of whittled on by the head porter to gain some airflow. You add strength to the casting first, and then find your airflow after the fact. So that way you can keep on adding your 25, 50, whatever freaking big block in a bottle you're putting in that thing, right? But, you know, this head development thing, years of experience is really what puts that together. And having a good tuner on the keyboard to validate what that cylinder head can do is really what it is at the end of the day. And, you know, you mentioned something like, why did this head do this and this other head didn't do that? You know, you put brand A this and our brand, you know, it picked up, what was it, 90 horsepower?
It was 90 over what they typically would make.
Yeah, well, that's pretty good. Yeah. So, but you know, you want to know like, what's the magic? Like, what the heck happened? You're like, I'm looking in there and I see CNC and I see CNC and I see.
I'm no, port guy, but I see enough products that.
I mean, that's the thing.
It didn't look like some big port. You know, I could see just as much of the valve that I could see in other heads, and
you know, and just because it's bigger doesn't mean it's better.
Right. Well, that's a.
That's a whole,
Depends on where you're
in this.
In
this realm.
Yeah.
doing the most with the smallest is the best.
Yeah, and the everyone wants to know where the magic is, right? Outside of the sheets, it's where the seat ceiling angle is at, a 1/4 inch below it and a 1/4 inch above it. That's where all the magic is. That 1/2 inch, that's where everything happens. What happens from that seat ceiling surface and a 1/4 inch either way will dictate what that head is going to be, because what happens there will dictate what the port shape is even, and the port shape will dictate what the combo is going to do. And then, you know, it's a chicken or the egg situation. You need to know basically what valve job and what bowl design is going to go into the cylinder head, and then everything else follows suit. So
what about when you're developing heads that are going to have different intake manifolds and different headers and different things like that, though? Like, I mean,
production
limit whatever you need to limit.
Like our production LS3 ported factory casting.
Yeah.
You're kind of batting for averages here, right?
That's
You're trying to come up with a setup that's going to be good for everything and probably not perfect for any of them. But that's everybody, unless you do something custom, you know. But working with a factory head, you're already working with the constraints of what's already been put in there from the factory. Right. So it's not like having a porter's casting
you can develop your own
head
tunnel,
where we can put the port where we want it, whatever height and everything. But like you said, the port size or whatever, you know, we specifically have targets for feet per second for air speed within the port, and probably even within certain areas of the port.
That's a huge.
That we target.
Yeah, that's huge. Airspeed is what makes a cylinder head. To be quite honest, and it's not just about airspeed. It's about airspeed. If you're looking at the gasket flange, right? You're looking at the intake manifold flange. The best head may not flow the most CFM.
Right.
I don't care what anyone says. That is not what makes a combo fast. Using all of the port is what makes it fast. And what I mean by that is if you're looking at the LS7 shape, the LS3, Cathedral, LT, whatever shape, the airspeed needs to match as close as possible from top left to bottom right and vice versa. Because that means that you're using the whole shape of the port, if you want to think about it like that.
Well, it kind of, I guess, maybe relates to like a laminar flow situation.
You have laminar and all these other.
Well, I'm just saying that, for instance, like, it's going to flow so well together that you're not going to have things fighting each other.
Yeah, you don't want to. You want to eliminate turbulence, obviously.
That's you're eliminating turbulence, and if you got like, you know, you have a high speed short side, you know, towards bore center, right? Well, you could have it towards so aggressive towards pulling. You think about it like it's pulling air from the roof of the port, and then you're not even using that whole shape. You know, that's just a very easy way to look at it. And little things such as what radius or what angle the floor is at, or, you know, or what the width of the port is over the short side, even though it's, you know, these heads are covered in pretty CNC lines, boy, there's a lot of science that happens between that seat ceiling angle and the intake manifold flange. Right. And there is no clear answer as to why one will perform better than another. And, you know, you touched up on this, like these heads are done, it's kind of like a best case for most. You know, but what you do, like what we do is like, hey, we design the head, we grind cams. All right, let's grind cams to make this head work. You know, I mean, that's what you do.
You can cam an exhaust port. In my experience, if you have a head with an exhaust port that's a little lacking, I can compensate, and for that with the camshaft on the exhaust side. I cannot compensate for a crappy intake port. There's not anything you can do with that.
Yeah.
Now, if you have a really efficient intake port that moves a lot of air and it's got great airspeed, you probably can get away with less intake lobe on the cam. But you can't necessarily say, "Oh, I've got this intake port that's a little lazy," and prop it up. But you can prop up an exhaust port.
Because the air's got to come in, and then you got to worry about getting it out after.
Yeah.
So if it's not coming in, it doesn't matter because you didn't have the air to put out.
You can prop up the exhaust port to help get the air out, but the induction side, the intake side, you can't really compensate for a bad head port just with camshaft.
Just big block in a bottle. That's how you compensate for bad
Big block
engine
in a
build.
bottle will do it.
Right.
Nitromethane will do it, I promise.
Well, I know a lot of common theory, I guess, and for the most part seems to be true is whatever it makes NA, it'll make double at 1 atmosphere.
Yeah.
And it's pretty close, but you're saying that the porting is different for boost to NA. How much does that really play? Or are we just talking about for longevity or?
Okay.
You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, see, the thing is you'll have a lot of people say that they've designed the port for power adder and they've designed the port for this.
I've heard that a lot.
Power adder exhaust port.
Just make it big. Sewer pipe, right?
Power one thing you'll do with a head for a power adder is you'll soft chamber it.
That was soften it?
Yeah, soften the chamber.
Yeah, soften the chamber.
Like maybe a 7-degree soft chamber.
I learned that quite a while ago. I actually did some testing on that years back and was able to run 3 more degrees of timing in a motor that had the same head. They just softened it, and I was able to make 3 more using my little Plex setup and all that.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, this is insane. That most people don't do that.
Yeah,
nowadays they do.
Some
But this
NA
was
setups.
This was like 5-6 years ago.
Some NA setups can even benefit with a soft chamber setup.
Yep.
But there's not really for the kind of stuff we do. The majority of stuff we do, there's not like, oh, we got to have this head for a power adder and this head for an NA deal.
So there's gains you could get, but
Potentially.
it's not enough to make a difference, or.
When the head is pretty good, the head is just.
It don't matter what's in,
Pretty
it
good.
doesn't matter if it's supercharged or blown or
Good head's good head.
a good head's a good head. The only
Good
time
head's
the only time that's really going to change is when you've got like some crazy fuel system that's hogging up some room in your intake port. Because down at Kuntz we have a lot of like X275, X235, and LDR type builds and stuff like that. And
That X235 is some wild shit.
oh, dude,
that's hard to.
For people that just quickly don't know what that is.
8.5-inch tire trying to hold the same power that a 275 tire is.
Wow, like how is that a thing? People were like, "Oh, 275 just wasn't good enough. Let's get more crazy.
Let's make it more spicy."
It's chess when everybody else is playing checkers.
Yeah.
It's for the guys that really like a challenge.
I didn't mean to tangent off.
Oh no,
It's so crazy that people sleep on that. Like that is a wild thing to do.
But, if you're watching this video, don't sit here and think that we're saying the cylinder head doesn't matter for power adder NA. I'm not saying it doesn't. Now, the head for a 376-inch NA setup, or a 376 with let's say an LSA setup with a 1.9 blower, right?
Yep.
And then this engine over here is a 427 with a 2650. That's a little bit different requirement.
Yeah.
So that's going to be a different
Because it's going to obviously need a much larger intake.
Yeah, but if I had a 376 naturally aspirated setup and then a 376 with an LSA head, that head is going to be pretty much similar for both combinations.
Well, what if that 427 is only revving to like 6,500, 7,000, and that 388's revving or 376 is revving to like 85?
Yeah, I mean,
does that RPM make enough of a difference to make up for the cubic inch?
Well, at that
Or
point,
are
you're
we
going to
talking
have
two
to,
different things? Is it apples and oranges?
You're going to have to start looking at things like where the head flow is. Like the setup that's going 6,500 probably has something that's milder on valve lift, so the head would probably. You'd want the head to be really strong in the early lift, early and mid lift, and you wouldn't care what the head was doing at 700, 800, 900 lift because
unless you're trying to sell
never
it.
getting it.
Yeah, I know a lot of people tout the 700 lift numbers, and I'm just like, but none of our stuff goes that high.
Yeah, with a
to-
620
I mean, I
lift
get-
cam.
To make it
There's a
flow,
few people, but like, yeah, most cams are what, 620, 650?
Yeah.
making it flow at 700 looks great on a flow bench,
Mhm.
but it drops the airspeed in the port, and essentially it's going to end up, not being a performer. It's one of those typical scenarios of dynos don't win drag races,
Right.
and flow sheets don't either, because they don't
Yeah.
always tell the tale. I would rather see the airspeed of the port almost than I would to see the actual flow of the port if I was looking at
So
stuff.
for the general customer, it's but if you were really kind of trying to get every bit, then you would want to have you develop a cylinder head specifically towards the application.
Yeah, so we have our BR7 head. How many variants do we have of
Yeah,
that?
so the BR7, we offer the Max 2.0, which is that stock bore size LS3, package thing that we did. And then we have a 278, what we refer to as a 278, because a customer, they understand CCs. That's the customer's been trained to gauge a cylinder
Intake
head.
volume.
Yeah, so
Yeah, intake port volume.
what we have with this one casting, we got the Max 2.0, the 278, and the 292. And those are all three for totally different applications. They're not a one size fit
We
all.
have the same head casting, but each one of those head castings have different valve sizes, different port volumes,
Yep.
cross section area, just totally different applications. So yes, there are scenarios where you need a different variant for your application. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
And not to mention, let's just say this: that there are Max 2.0s, 258 cc,
258. Yep.
258 has been about, I'm pretty sure it's about 30 horsepower better than our ported factory LS3 heads. And Matt Moore has them on his 235 drag and drive car that went like 460
In drag and drive
with
trim.
the same cylinder head that we run on the NA stuff
Mm-hmm.
with his turbo setup, his turbo LS.
I don't know if these guys are ready for the competition or the conversation of Cathedral Port Mafia versus that Max 2.0. Oh my
geez.
God.
Oh my God.
We could share some data as,
Here it goes.
yeah.
Here it goes.
Yeah, it's deep. It's deep. We ain't got enough battery on these cameras here.
You know what I
but-
know?
I mean, they're plugged in the wall, you might as well skim it.
You know what I know?
Oh, okay,
This is
yeah.
what I know. The engine doesn't have the slightest clue of the shape of that intake port. That's what I know.
At the end of the day, it's just pump.
It's the air still has to come in. Now, there are some differences between the ports, obviously, and I probably wouldn't want to, even if I could put an 823 big rectangle port on a 5.3, I wouldn't because it's too big. So yeah,
Yep.
Cathedral ports rock on that stuff.
But it's by a function of CC and whatnot, right?
It's-
I mean,
It's
CC.
It's a
but-
function of cylinder head needed for that engine.
Yeah.
Right. Now, when we start going and talking about doing stuff like the Cathedrals on the larger engines and stuff, some guys swear by doing that. We've done the whole test of Trick Flow 245, Mac Daddy Max ported versus a factory, bone stock factory casting with our port in it. And our rectangle ported head was better, even though the Trick Flow had probably better valve angle.
Yeah, better valve
and
angle.
was supposed to be, the bee's knees.
Better in what metric?
Well, usually you get a flatter valve angle, like say 12 degree instead of 15 degree. You have a straighter approach to the valve.
So what I'm saying, like, we're talking engine dyno.
Engine dyno,
Okay.
absolutely. Engine dyno back to back, like tested. The GMPP ported heads out of the Performance Parts catalog, our ported factory castings, Trick Flow 245 that were done up by a well-known individual, and just doing all this stuff for the sake of learning initially, but finding out that, hey, and I know lots of turbo guys through the years that used to swing really hard for the Cathedral port camp,
Because they said
have
less
gone
turbo.
faster with rectangle ports with less boost. And I'm talking about fast guys. I'm not talking about,
Yeah, they just don't post it.
oh, they posted.
Well, I can tell you right now,
They didn't at first.
So-
That was
No,
like
they
a
didn't
war.
at first.
Matt Moore is actually, someone who wants to provide some credibility to this argument. Ran faster with less boost going from a Mac Daddy Trick Flow Cathedral to our Max 2.0 head. Everything was just,
Like I was telling you earlier when we were just visiting when you first came in, you have an engine and you have a set of cylinder heads. And this is
100% its capability. The camshaft is what dictates how, if you're going to get 90% of that efficiency out of it, 80%, 70%, how good that camshaft is going to dictate how good that combination runs, provided that you have the right cylinder heads for the right engine.
Yeah.
That cylinder head shape of the port, that was brilliant marketing for people to sell skinny port heads. That's what I can say. I've never seen have any of the record cars, hydraulic roller records, or any of the LSs that are in the 3s, in the 8th. I don't know. I don't think any of those are running skinny port heads. I think they're all rectangle ports.
Is that what we call it? Skinny port?
It's like skinny jeans, man.
I don't know.
I mean, I was always on the rectangle port side, but that's mostly because I was trying to make more power with less money. Because it seemed like when I had tested them in car application, I would have to get an aftermarket Cathedral to stay with a stock LS3. Yeah. And then those GMPP ones, man,
they're pretty
they
good.
were pretty damn good.
They're pretty good.
Because I remember getting some the GMPP LS9s from Summit. It was like $1,500.
Yeah.
And I picked up more power on those than I did. I think I had a set of 235s at the time. I don't even know if the 245 was out at that point. But I see all the guys go back and forth, and I'm like,
I think like anything, there's application. But if your application can handle that 250, 260 plus port volume, and that kind of cross section for your setup, then it's gonna be better. I mean, a lot of those engines that were touting that the Cathedrals were really the best. If you look, a lot of those were limited combination setups. Right, so they were either limited on how much turbo they could run, or maybe they were limited on cubic inch. But when you take the gloves off and you go out there and you try to go fast, the rectangle port's where it's at.
Bam.
That's it.
Yeah. End the story.
I mean, I can't argue that one.
I mean, somebody's going to argue that.
Absolutely. But somebody'd argue it.
That's what the comment section is for, I guess.
Just we've seen it. I mean, we've just seen it. I know people personally, and I've had customers that have done this and gone faster with the rectangle port stuff.
Yeah.
So and there's people that argue the opposite way too, though. But really, at the end of the day, they just had the wrong head on there in the first place.
Yeah, maybe so.
I mean, that's all it is.
Well, so from the race car stuff, because race car and street car stuff is a lot different. Because you build cars here too, right? When you go to say set up a deal for a customer, right? Because you'll get, let's wait for LT. Let's just stick on LS first.
Sure.
When you have somebody coming here with a 5th gen, and they're like, "Hey man, I want to go fast, but I'm gonna drive it on the street." Where do you approach that from a drivability, compression, and fuel standpoint?
Yeah. That's a good one. It's very in depth on the build process, and that initial consultation with the customer is
because that's
always
a big part of running the shop, right?
Right. Yeah.
You want to make sure that you don't limit him because that up front he's full of shit. Because when he tells you he wants to go here, every customer wants here.
Yeah, but what's fast? What's fast for that customer versus what's
it's
fast
relative,
for me?
and that's the issue. But knowing that is definitely a big part of running a shop, especially when you have control of every aspect of the car.
Yeah.
You can get them from here to here, and you know what it takes, but how do you approach that?
Yeah, so I think we have to nail it down with a little bit more detail than just, I want to go fast, this is my budget, and I want to drive it on the street, and I want it to drive okay. Well, what is drive okay? Is that like it? So what's drivability? Are you sensitive to things that you don't like the cam surge at 1,200 RPMs, or you could if it cruises at 2,200 RPMs? Like, how much aggression can I get away with? What is driving good for you? I have to figure that out. I have to feel them out and get a gauge for that. Then what's fast? Like, do you want to go like naturally aspirated? Let's say, you want to go 650s in the 8th. Is that fast enough for you? Or for the people you're trying to run, is it faster than that? Or 7.0? Is it 7.0 fast? Because this guy's never had anything that's been like that before, So getting a little bit more detail helps certainly. That's the biggest thing to kind of gauge what their idea of those criteria actually is, and then from there, obviously you got to look at the budget, work that. So okay, you want to run 650s, you want to be full weight, no weight reduction. You don't want to change the brakes. You're just going to put some race stars on it with 17s, something that fits and clears. We're going to have to make some pretty decent power, right? So maybe we're looking at a 416 that makes some more torque, has some grunt, that's going to help pull that heavy weight. Or maybe that guy is like, no, I'm cool with weight reduction. I'll pull the seats out, and we can get this thing down to 3,600 pounds. Okay, then maybe I can get there with a stop bottom end. But it's just going to essentially depend on what his take is on good drivability and
a lighter car will also change how you spec things.
Yeah, it's going to change the converter.
That's something that a lot of people may not realize, that when you were saying earlier that the torque changes the stall, so does the weight.
So does the weight, big time.
That's something a lot of people don't realize. They'll cut a bunch of weight out of their car, and now they're out of their efficiency.
Yeah, right.
They're flashing through the converter, and they're like, "What the hell's going on?"
Yeah. I mean, you drop the weight in the converter. You get light, the converter's going to get tighter. You get heavier and add more load that the converter has to work against, and the converter's going to get looser. Yeah. So, all that stuff changes around, and that is the hardest part. And to be detailed like we are, I mean, that's why we chase after these numbers and goals and everything, because we're super detailed. So that is a benefit, but it's also like, it's almost like it's a curse sometimes to be so detailed, because like, where do you stop? Where do you draw the line? Like,
that's the issue.
How finite does this have to be? Like, so that is the challenge. That just varies from customer to customer. A lot of the people want their car to sound good. They want to make a reasonable amount of power and have a nice driving setup that their wife can get in and cruise around, or they can pick their kids up from school. That's what the majority of our customer base probably is. Then a large portion probably does like to go out to the track and do some what I call street strip stuff.
Right.
You can get away with a little rougher drivability at low speeds, usually with those guys, and in favor of some more performance. Then we've got the grudge guys and the race guys, and you pretty much just can do just about whatever you need to do to win the race at that point.
Well, so back how you were saying how this all kind of started wanting to do it from like a dealership level, right?
Mm-hmm.
You stage your packages. You have 1, 2, 3, I think, and 4.
Yeah, like cams and stuff like that.
Do you offer cars in that aspect? Because I know some shops like doing that. The guys, some people don't like doing that. It kind of just depends, because it sucks to put a stage on something because people don't realize how much more the detail really is.
That's kind of corny.
Yeah, well, yeah.
It's kind of corny. I got a stage 1 car.
What is surprised how many
stage 1
like,
compared
I got a
to what?
stage 4 cam in my truck.
Yeah, stage 4 compared to what? That same person's stage 3, because like my stage 4 cam is, maybe bigger than some people's stage 5 cam or whatever, however many stages we have these days. But
so how do you approach that aspect when you have customers that are like, I want a stage 4 build, and then you're like,
well, I talk to them. I have Kevin and those guys talk to them in terms of just like you were talking about. What are their goals? What are their end goals? Let's don't worry about stage numbers. Let's talk about your goals, and then I want to put you in the right camshaft. Like, do you want to run a converter or not? Are you okay with running some gear in the car or not? And then we go from there. Stages, our stage cams like SS1, that was meant to be street strip. That's what that was meant to be, because it's kind of, your hot rod cam, right? SS1, SS2, SS3.
And then, they're pretty well explained on the website, which I thought was really cool, because you kind of give the like, hey, your compression should be here.
Right.
This should be here. You should have this. Where a lot of cam manufacturers, I don't see that. So that was something I really liked, because when I get the customers, like I told you, with the SS4 cam on stock motor, stock heads, and I'm just like, why?
10 times a week.
I can show them the website, and they're like, oh, well, I know I read that, but
I thought
10 times a week, SS3. Can I run that with a stock converter? Sure. If you don't mind your car being absolutely buck nasty when you get to the red light pushing through and wanting to fight, you can. But there's a reason I specifically said you need a 3600 and up converter.
Right.
I read that on the website, but maybe they just
without getting without losing the people that are trying to kind of focus on it. What would you explain why they need the compression or the converter, or why they need these things to run these cams, and what running that cam on a stock motor is doing?
So larger cams bleed off more cylinder pressure, because what happens is the larger cams are meant to pick up more mid-range and upper RPM horsepower and to stretch that RPM curve out. So to make that happen, you have to close the intake valve later. When you close the intake valve later, that drops dynamic cylinder pressure. So let's say you have a static compression engine. Let's say
stock 10.5, right?
Yeah, let's say stock 10.5, or if you want to think of LT 11.5 to 1. And let's say
I want to separate the LSLT because I know
LS.
it is a lot different, right?
10.5 to 1, 10.4 on the L99, 10.7 on the LS3. And let's say hypothetically with the stock cam, that thing, if you were to check the cranking compression on it, let's say it pumps 180 psi, roughly. Let's throw some numbers out because I haven't done it in a long time. Now, take our SS4 cam. That may drop that down to 160. It's going to drop that down. Now, the LS engines probably aren't as sensitive to that as the LTs are, but bigger cams need bigger compression because ultimately you want to keep that cylinder pressure up. You want to keep it at an optimal range. It's only going to help you make power.
Right.
When you get
cylinder pressure is the name of the game.
Yes.
While it's controlled.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's absolutely. You need to. You want to start. And guys also they ask, well, how much compression can I run on pump gas? And that ultimately depends on the camshaft. Again,
that's something a lot of people don't realize is the camshaft will dictate how much bleed off will allow you to run so much octane. Correct?
I can run 14 to 1 on pump gas if I put an absolutely absurd camshaft in it.
Make sure that's a disclaimer.
That's not practical. Okay. Disclaimer. I'm saying hypothetically,
because somebody's going to do that.
I could do it, but it would be such a junk setup that it's not practical to really want to do that in a functional environment. But the camshaft to compression ratio relationship is super important. That's why you get some guys that overcam the cars and you notice they're just super lazy. And then up here at the tippy top of the RPM, man, they finally get enough engine speed where it starts to work a little bit.
Right.
But those cars don't perform good when they're overcammed because, it makes power up here, but now it shifts and it has to recover and pull through that.
You've lost everything under the curve.
You've lost your acceleration at that point. That's why oftentimes small cams work really good. A small cam and a really good set of cylinder heads is a hard combo to beat, especially on a daily driver type car or something like that. When you get ready to run some real grown man camshaft, like the big stuff, like to turn that 8,000 plus RPM, you got to run the compression. I mean, you need to be up there 14 plus to 1 on that stuff.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's a non-starter.
And by small cam, we mean perfectly normal average size.
On like the daily driver stuff, normal stuff. When I say
I
say grown man cam, I'm talking about things that are like on a 376 engine that would start in the 240s or 250s at 50.
Right. But putting a cam that's in the 240s, 250s on a car,
with stock compression.
I mean, you're just making a dog because
it'll run about like a 305.
That valve will be open longer, absolutely.
Yeah.
But the port's not going to flow that air.
Well, you don't have anything combo related that's going to let you get to that engine RPM and actually accelerate the engine at that point when it's overcammed like that. But the engine is going to be so lazy, it's going to be.
I think that's where a lot of people don't focus is focusing on. I mean, the bigger cam is, to generalize it, is just you taking your power curve and doing this.
That's what they think, yes, and that's what they want.
But they don't realize what you have to do to make that effect work.
It's a must. Yeah, it's a must. It is a necessity. Now, like I said, LS stuff, we can go up to like our SS4, our Stage 4 cam on stock compression. It still makes killer mid-range and upper RPM. It doesn't really affect it negatively. Now, like you said, you've experienced this before with Stage 4 LT deal.
Yeah.
Not the same case.
No.
Some engines are more sensitive to that cylinder pressure change than others. But if you're generally speaking, as a whole, cylinder pressure needs to be preserved, and you need to do what you need to do compression wise as you increase in cam size.
But also in relation to how you can control that.
Yeah.
So that's going to be your fuel.
Yeah, fuel, and you don't want to put too small of a cam in with too much static compression, and then try to run 93 octane, and all of a sudden, you got 250 pounds of cranking compression and it's sitting there detonating at idle.
Well, you can only run like 18 degrees wide open.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So it kind of really all works hand in hand, and that's why you would say you structure it per customer basis.
Yes, absolutely.
Because doing it in the stages, you're going to leave a lot.
Yeah, if I've got a guy in Arizona that can only get 91 octane, but he's running at 8,000 DA, I may be able to get by with,
right,
a little bit more compression and a little, on a smaller cam because the engine is struggling to breathe already.
Well, because that gauge that would pump 180 at sea level is going to pump, 150 to 170.
Yeah, it's not going to be good, right?
Up there.
So, but a guy that's down in South Louisiana that runs at negative 1,500 DA when it's this time of year, that is wanting to have to have a pump gas and E85 friendly setup. Well, we're going to have to kind of dance the line of compression and camshaft at that point. It's not just a point and shoot. Oh, you can run this cam.
Now, what about having an efficient setup, say on LS, right, and running E85, like even a stock engine? I mean, is that a beneficial thing?
There's not a lot of power in E85 on the LS at 10.5, 11 to 1. On most combos that are cammed or whatever, like it's single digits, like maybe 4 or 5 horsepower from my findings on stuff we do. Somebody out there's probably made a chunk of power on some oddball combo or something that
right. But you're talking an average of cars that because it's not like you've only done that on 1 or 2 cars.
I've just done a couple of them.
So yeah, like 4.
Yep.
100. But
1,000.
But so basically, all right. So LS stuff, cam compression, cylinder head, it's all super critical. When you started getting into the LT stuff, you built all this knowledge on the LS platform, and you went to the LT. How was that shift?
They're pretty similar, honestly. To me, they're pretty similar. Like they want similar things with camshaft, but where they differ the most, to me, is they're way more sensitive to compression, as in they don't like to be low on it. And I think that's just the nature of the beast with direct injected engines. That's part of the benefit. You can get by with more compression with the, because of the fuel delivery, the atomization, and all the good things from the DI itself. And we tested DI versus port injection on stuff. It's worth 40 plus horsepower over port injection or your best carburetor or whatever. I know the carb guys are going to hate to hear that.
Yeah,
they're not going to believe me, but we've done it on the same engine.
Yep.
We've done it back to back to back, and it's 40 plus horsepower for DI. So
now, in your opinion, why?
So I have a couple of theories, and I'm not an engineer by any means, and I can't tell you on a scientific level exactly, but if you break it down and look at what's different, what are you doing? You're putting fuel directly into the chamber, right? So now you're taking up airspace with fuel. So one would tend to believe that air charge now is going to be a little bit more dense. So I think that, and I think also not only is it going to be more dense, but the atomization is phenomenal. So it's going to be probably more complete burn, I think, comes from it. And lastly, you're not putting fuel through the port. So you're not occupying airspace with fuel, which would be a small amount on a lot of port-injected engines, but it's still airflow that would be displaced by fuel on a port-injected or a carbureted engine, right?
Right. So
those are the things I look at and consider and believe, in my humble opinion, make the DI better. It's just better complete combustion. Maybe there's an increase in cylinder pressure because of the fuel delivery being right in the chamber there, and then obviously a fuel-free induction port to work with. So
right, yeah.
Some of our best performing heads for the LT stuff are smaller than the factory port, by the way. Because of airspeed. So
airspeed.
Pretty large, right?
It is. Our CID head is smaller than the factory port.
What have you noticed from the machining aspect of? So I know a lot of LS stuff. We had issues, specific LSA, from what I've seen, of the cylinders being offset bored to where I had a thin and a thick side of the sleeve. On the LSA, we'd get a lot of, if it cracked one, it cracked all four, and it was super thin on one side. Looking at the LT heads, and this is just me visually, it looks like a core shift is significantly worse on the LT than they've ever been on LS.
On the cylinder heads?
Yeah.
Yeah, at the end of the day, all they're doing is producing a product to sell off the dealer lot. I mean, I don't know why they don't think about us doing 800 plus horsepower stock bottom end motors. I don't understand why GM isn't doing that. But, the head is designed to do its intended job for its purpose on the dealership lot. They don't really leave much room for us. That's why most of what we sell on that head is pretty CNC lines. Again, the real magic of that ported factory head is where I told you that half inch right around the seat ring, quarter inch above and below the sealing surface. That's really where we pick up most of our power from.
Because it seems like, you get a lot of cylinder heads, like the LS stuff, you usually have the full pretty port, maybe one or two spots not touched. But on the LT stuff, there's a lot that gets untouched, and it's totally different between a lot of the different cylinder heads that I see.
Right.
So I'm sure a lot of people buy the heads, and they're like, oh, they missed a spot.
Well, look, we've had heads come back that over time that have sprung a leak into water just because, and we've dissected those heads and looked, and the exhaust port on this end of the head may have 250 thousandths of floor material, and on this end it has
12.
Yeah, 12 or something. Yeah, something ridiculous. And that may be a little bit of an exaggeration.
Yeah, I mean, it is.
But the core shift from end to end
It's pretty crazy.
it is.
it's pretty terrible. Now, how do you, when we develop a port program on a donor
That's what I'm saying.
head,
How do you adjust
and it's
to that?
good on that, now we port hundreds of sets of heads, and then occasionally we run into it. And it just, we do our best to work with people and say, supply another core, and maybe I'll help out. Or
You
whatever.
handle it, quality control, and your customer service is pretty good.
Yeah,
from
it's
what I've
usually
heard.
on point. I mean, we're not trying to leave anybody out to dry, right? I mean,
Right.
there's no benefit for me to deliver a bad product. That's never what we wanted to do. But we step up and take care of stuff. Obviously,
That's how you keep the customer coming back. you know?
Whether we're at fault for something or not at fault, like I said, we take care of stuff sometimes that we really shouldn't. But we do it because we like to help people, and we do it for the.
As long as somebody approaches it the right way.
Yeah, I mean, one of the best way to not get help is to run to the internet
Post
first.
it online. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the best way is to if you want to do that and go down that route, then I'm probably gonna not spend a whole lot of time entertaining, because at that point you've already said things that could potentially damage or hurt and hinder that whole situation. What good is it for me at that point to try to help out? Like,
I've actually seen some of those situations and watch them unfold.
Mm-hmm.
And I watch you strategically help while still picking apart where the customer went wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I
was like, man, that's pretty bad. He should probably stop. And the customer just keeps going. And I'm like, boy, you got to just expose yourself there.
Yeah.
So I know that's a battle. But I guess, so customer service deal, I mean, handling all that. When it comes to the LT, I wanted to kind of go back. When you're going to pick the compression for those, can you run more compression on the LTs on the pump gas than the LS?
Yes.
Just yes. And they just respond to it a lot better.
Yes.
Because I've noticed in like the boosted application, when they build these motors and they're like 9.5 to 1 LT, like it just runs terrible.
Yeah.
Power is just not there.
You have to run like 28 degrees of timing to make any power.
28 starting.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, this is insane. I don't understand what, and then I come to find out, like, they built it 9.5 to 1.
Yeah.
Like,
bro, there's a reason that GM started at like 10.2 or 10.5 to 1 or whatever with the LT4.
Right.
There's a reason they didn't start in the 9s. There's a reason the LT1 didn't start in the 10s. It started at 11 to 1 or 11.5 to 1. Then the L83, I think, is 11 to 1. So with globally, the whole DI engine program with GM runs more compression than its predecessor does.
Right. And part of that was obviously for efficiency.
Yeah.
Right. Fuel economy, even. But I do get a lot of the guys that'll be like, oh, we're going to take the DI off. We're just going to go full port. Have you had customers do that and notice the drawbacks of it?
Well, I mean, we do have customers that run port only, and I think a full race application that's acceptable.
Yeah.
Any driven combo, I think it's a step backwards. But look at Doug Cook from Motion Race Works. He runs a set of our CID LT heads.
Delete.
DI delete,
Yeah.
port only. It's the fastest LT powered car in the quarter mile currently. I mean, he's been 690 at 210 or something like that.
Yeah.
And the car weighs like 3,400 pounds or something.
GM still, man.
Do you
Yeah.
do you feel like, and I know this isn't a thing or possible, but if he could get it full DI, it would be faster at the same.
You know, the problem is really at the end of the day, the aftermarket's lagging a little bit to be able to provide a DI solution to let him go as fast as he is right now.
Well, if we can, so we can. I'm gonna say I haven't tested it out fully, but if we can make 1,000 of that horsepower on DI, right, and then he makes the rest on port, would there be an advantage there, or do you think it's just a waste of money, waste of time?
When
Would
we
you
start,
advise somebody
when we
to do
start
that?
having to do, even on the NA cars where we're running some fuel mixes and stuff, when we start having to run a fair amount of port bias at that point because of the fuel volume, we stop kind of seeing as much benefit with the DI stuff. Like if you can stay DI heavy, like and be majority DI, I think you're better off. But you got to be able to keep it within that injection window where it's happy with DI, right? So this yellow ZR1 back here, actually behind me, the thing's got a ported blower, like a baby cam you can't even hear. No cats. I think it's still got the exhaust manifolds on it and the air induction.
It doesn't drive on the street either.
Never.
Right.
So when tuning it, I did just that. I tried it just DI only on the dyno, and it was fuel at DI only, but it was getting to a point where the injection event was really late. And there's a sweet spot there where you get beyond, and it's like I lost 30 horsepower. So then I turned the port back on, and I ended up being about 40% port contribution at wide open throttle, which those cars don't even run the port from the factory at wide open throttle until they're in cat protection mode.
Yep.
Yeah. So
That's a European thing, actually.
so weird.
Yeah.
But yeah, at about 40% port blend is where that thing was the happiest. But that's because it took that to get the injection event, the end of injection event,
Where you wanted it, where it was happy.
where it was happiest. Yes. Yeah.
And we've done the same.
But I think if you theoretically, if you could fuel 2,000 horsepower with direct injection and not use port, yeah, I think it would be a little bit benefit.
Right. So for your average street car, pulling the direct off is definitely a negative step. For average street car,
Yeah, you might as well put a carburetor on it.
Yep.
That's
I
kind
mean,
of how I
mean,
feel.
You're in the same ballpark. Like you had all this coolness here,
Yeah.
and
Carburetor,
now
bias,
you've gone
pulse.
backwards. Like that's literally. If you look at a Gen 5 LT, yeah, it starts with a little bit more compression, but the head from the factory really isn't any better than a factory LS3 head.
Well, isn't a cannon valve factory?
It is, but if you
It
look at flow numbers and stuff, it doesn't really move much more air or any more air. It's very comparable. I'll say I'm not going to say there's not some differences, but you have the same cubic inch engine, right? You have about the same amount of camshaft in each engine on the LS3 and LT1, and you have heads that move similar quantities of air. The LT1 actually is probably a bigger head port, but what you do have is a tad more compression and a way better fuel system. And look how much more powerful the LT1 is across the curve. It makes
From start to finish, it's a
killer torque. Yeah.
Well, and if you think back, a 600 horsepower LS3 wasn't a popular thing.
Right.
And then, you were like, oh man, I had to do a 427 to get over 600. A 600 horsepower LT is
Common.
shaving the heads, and
mod for mod, the LT's better.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. 100% on
Well,
naturally aspirated stuff until you get. I would say till you get to the higher end race stuff. Like if you're building an all out NA deal, right? LS still has better head offerings
because it's been around longer, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Sure. Yeah, for sure.
But I mean, most of your business is probably street cars,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So for the sake of pissing everyone off, LS versus LT, where do you stand on it?